said that they'd like to have a trail. So we're going to look and see what's the easiest way that we can get people into the woods and be able to walk around. So that's sort of the goal of today. So of why I do things on trails and why I think it's important. And I think the best way to do it is by going over a short poem by Robert Frost that I had to learn in high school and has stayed with me. And I have it in front of me. I have it memorized, except when I stand in front of people, and then it goes blank. So it's stopping by the woods in a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of the easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And this has really stuck with me. And I think trails really sort of puts this into real life too. That with having trails, and what we're going to do is try to go through the woods. Hopefully it won't snow today, but we are in Corry, so you never know. But to give people the opportunity, you need relief from the everyday stresses and everything else. And you know, these things that happen in Texas and everywhere else, we need to provide outlets for people to be able to enjoy. And even if it's just a small trail like we're going to try to identify today, why, I think it makes a big difference. But as much as you may like the woods and enjoy it, you have to come back to reality. And miles to go before you sleep, and miles to go before you sleep. And I'm 66. I started my own consulting business in late 2018. And I don't know that I'll ever retire from it. That it's a passion of mine. I enjoy doing trails. Besides that, when I travel, I get to go on trails, and I can charge a lot of different expenses to it that I wouldn't be able to without having a trail consulting firm. So this is something that is with me, and I hope to expand and show people a little bit of my passion. And I think that's important that people become passionate on trails so that other people also enjoy the trails. And if you go to this little drawing here, hopefully I didn't make it too complicated. But what I wanted to do is just go over, people don't really have a vision, I think a lot of times, of what they want for a trail. That they say, well, we're going to have a trail, and they turn it over to the engineer, and the engineer designs it, and the contractor builds it, and people say, well, this isn't what I wanted. But they really didn't give the engineer, the contractor, enough of a definition of what to do. So this is a little drawing that I sort of use over and over again. And you can see it has a treadway, and I really like crushed limestone. It gets harder, it gets soft in the winter time, but for the most time, it's hard, and it's a lot cooler than what asphalt is. But asphalt's okay. And then you see the berm, and I intentionally put the berm in green because I refer to it as a green berm. That on the side of the treadway, everyone looks at the treadway as just a trail. But to me, it's sort of the whole environment that you're looking at. And the berm there, are you going to mow it? Are there needles like we have here today that we can keep it clear? But you have some kind of berm that, much like a road, you can get off to the side, rest, have benches. If it's a bicycle trail, repair your bike or just get off and stretch out. So I think berms are important. And then I do have there on drainage. Drainage to me is the number one problem for trails. In fact, as anyone on a railroad say, the top three things to maintaining a railroad is drainage, drainage, drainage. I believe that's the same way with trails. The three top things are drainage, drainage, drainage. And then you see I get complicated with X and Y. Well, these are some of the things that people really don't look at, is how high are we going to clear things so that it's not only clear so people can enjoy today, but for the rest of the year or for the next 5 years that you don't have to come back and do it. The same way with X. And I only put X over the treadway because that's what people think about. But I extend it most of the time over the berm and everything else. And the X and the Y is what's clear. But for the X, for the horizontal distance, you have to be able to maintain it easily, as much like the vertical height. What can you do to make it that it can easily be maintained, and you increase the chances of it being maintained? So the other handout, it's just, this is what I go over with different groups and try to have them define more of what we want. So for today, the treadway, we don't really have a width established. So that's something we're going to try to establish. Well, how wide do we really want something to be? In the berm, maybe the berm's going to be a little bit different here because there are so many pine needles. Drainage, we're going to have to take care of that because no one wants to walk through water, so that'll be a consideration. Along with drainage is sort of a natural with the grade. And lots of times grade, you just can't go steeper, as steep as the connect points, that you have to make it a little longer so you make it less of a grade. And with grade, you always have water problems. The steeper the grade, the more problems you can have with erosion and sediment. And I see some of them are, I double up on it, on the one I have. I think that's the one that I made, not the one that, the Y and the X I've already gone over about the height there. And what I try to do is people say, well, I'm riding a bicycle or I'm walking. This is all the higher I need it to be. But I try to encourage people to look at who's going to maintain it and how's it going to be maintained. Is the equipment they're running or is their operating equipment, are they going to be hitting any branches or anything? I've got Lyme's disease a couple times, and the last time it was pretty bad. But you don't want to expose them. Can you not expose them so they're not going through places that mosquitoes and ticks and everything else can get on them? So think of the maintenance that has to be done. Then I always put the placement of amenities, signs, benches, gates, vegetation. And I think that's important. What I like to do is say this table was a bench and the trail's going right through here. One of the things I like to do is whatever the trail is, I like to come behind that bench with the same material so that if it's limestone or asphalt, it's on there. And what that does is it just eases the maintenance of it. You don't have to go around here and weed eat, and everyone says weed eating isn't that much. Well, if you have 100 different amenities along a trail, and each one takes 5 minutes, why, there's 500 minutes real quick that you may not have to do. And then always look at who's your intended users and really make it as smooth for them to be able to want to use the trail, and it's a promotion. If you have all these signs and you have to walk single file, are people really going to enjoy the trail as much? Or if you make it a little wider so people can walk next to each other and be able to talk. So I've done enough talking here to start with. What I'd like to do is to actually go out into the woods and look at a couple things. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to sort of meander around a little bit at first, and I'll stop at different places, and then we'll start to mark out, after we've sort of walked the distance, we'll start to mark out what makes sense to be able to make a trail, and then actually try to make a little bit of a trail. If you have questions, or you think my ideas are crazy, don't be afraid to say, hey Ron, you're full of it. That you know, I'm not always right, as my wife tells me once in a while, and maybe it's how I'm explaining it, or maybe other people have other ideas, and it's surprising how much I learn from other people. As far as trails go, I've probably made more mistakes than anyone else. And what I try to do is try to help people that they don't make the same mistakes as what I made, and try to make things a little simpler. So, we ready to go outside?
Woohoo!
Okay.
Put in scrap lumber that we had laying around the building into a little box.
This marking is the start point, not necessarily that this will be the start point, but the quickest distance to get into the woods as soon as possible.
Those are like the most hammock perfect trees in the world right there.
One thing that we looked at doing was coming down the trail along there, but it gets lots of sunlight. You can see in woods along the side, wherever there's sunlight, there's lots of things that grow. So what we're trying to do is get into the shaded area as soon as possible and utilize the trees. A lot of trees are shade intolerant. You don't have bushes, and a lot of the plants are shade intolerant. So you're using that to be able to establish the trails and have less maintenance because it doesn't get much sunlight. So I'll sort of meander through here and show you the points, and then we're going to want people to come together and say, well, this is what would make a nice trail. And along with establishing trails, you got to look and see, well, what are you stepping on? And if we make this a trail that people are going to be walking on, are we walking on something important? Does anyone know what this white flower is?
That's what I was thinking.
I don't. And I have an apple in here that I may take a picture of it later and figure out where it is. But that's something else. It's not always we'll connect from here to here. Look and see what is in between the two and be able to avoid areas that people want to see and not trample it and somewhat destroy it. So again, we're into the woods as quickly as possible. It may seem like I'm meandering around, which I am, but I know where I want to go to for different points. So sometimes I've established places. Can you make some of these pools that they're lasting longer so that frogs and turtles can live there, so they actually eat the larvae of the mosquitoes, so you don't have as many mosquitoes.
Would you, I'm just curious, like in the process of mapping it out, would you then kind of come back, I'm imagining you would want to see it in different seasons, like,
Yes.
Does that make sense when spring starts and we get all the rain to make sure,
And that's a very good point, Shannon. What I usually do is I try to get out in the fall time or in the winter time.
Sure.
Whenever there's not the vegetation growing
sure.
and seeing it. And then the next worst time is mostly in March and early April when everything's mud, there's water just everywhere, and seeing, well, what can we do to control water? Because right there where Ashley is standing may be in a couple inches of water in March. So, do you make a little wooden crossing over that or different things like that? The other thing to notice is everything dries out when the vegetation comes out. It really makes a big difference with trees and other things. But I've mentioned about the sunlight before, so you can see where it's getting sunlight to our east, how much vegetation is actually there. And in underneath here, where it's underneath the shade, how little vegetation is actually growing here. So it somewhat becomes a screen along here. And to make the trail longer, we may want to meander back and forth, but at least we can utilize as much as possible. And I think people are looking at the total distance. And if you're only 50 feet or 100 feet or 150 feet from where you already walked, the important thing is you're out walking and you're enjoying what you're doing. Your old grandson, that as soon as I would turn around, he would have himself wrapped up in that barbed wire. And it's just a matter of something that would happen. So anytime you have something like that, I like to sort of note it so that it can be
barbed wire removal
can be taken care of. Of course, and you can see what green. I don't know what green that is on the far hill with the sand bunker on this side of it. Now they do own some property down in here, so you can see this sort of comes to a point, and as you go more that way, it just becomes steeper and steeper. So for the initial one, what I was thinking is meander back to this point and then go back into the woods, but at least this gives you sort of where you are and if people want to tie into where the golf course is. But eventually there may be more of a longer trail that would go down to the bottom and come up over the hill. And again, that's where signage is important, that people just know, well, this grade's going to be 6%, 8%, or something like that, and it's going to be tougher. So, although I like to make everything ADA accessible, why this is going to be very difficult. But I found out if you let people know ahead of time what a trail represents, then everyone's more understanding that of what the trail provides. So we came out of the woods right there, and we're going to go into the woods right here and go onto an old tram road. This goes back out onto that
I think it's
onto
right.
the
I think
road.
9 is right.
And we want to end up on that little ridge down there.
No, because I
There's
live
open.
on 2 and 11.
So there may end up being like a connector that meanders up
So it's
around
12,
here.
because then you
But
have to
we'll
connect.
go down
Yeah.
this way, then we'll go down a slower slope, and then we'll come back on that ridge line. There's a pipe right on the other side of that of the concrete, and it comes out on that side. So this is something to utilize to be able to make sure that it can collect to here, and the water go down, and the path can remain nice. And if nothing else, was a little bit of work on this. This may be something that you want to have some limestone on, so that someone with wheelchairs or something, or someone that wants to walk flat, could actually come down the road, come out to here, go out to that point, and go back, so that you're servicing as many people as possible. They'd have a route, and you have, for ones that are more willing to be more adventurous, they'd have a route also.
How long does it take for the limestone to like break down for wheels,
For
for like wheelchairs and stuff to get
To-
across easy?
yeah, well, every March and April it's going to get soft, and most of the time it's middle of April till it's hard, and that's with fines that it's called an ASHTO 10, and it does get soft. But once it's hard for the winter, and it's hard enough to be able to do. Now it will rut up once in a while, so you have to have something that goes over. But if you go with anything bigger than like a sand particle, why it's too hard to go over with a wheelchair, that it becomes too soft all the time, and you just can't push through it, and it's bouncing. With different users on trails, maybe there is a thin asphalt that can go out and back for wheelchairs to be able to go, but then there may be limestone or just a natural surface right next to it. But be able to provide what you can for people when possible. More section right here, but here you can have another access from the road. You could clear all this out if you wanted to, made it big, but are you going to invite ATVs and others? So you have a little path on the side, and that's part of all the decision making on making a trail. It may be that it's a simpler trail to walk here at one time, and then you clear that out if you ever want to make it for wheelchair accessibility, or someone with a walker that can go in this flat grade. So now we'll head off of this. Instead of going out onto the trail, this is where we can make another bend. And I'll just put a ribbon here.
No, never better. It was a harness. Hey, there's a hole there. This is good. Ooh. Hi, friend.
Another question that may need to be answered: if you put something other than needles here for a trail and mark the trail, if you're putting limestone or anything else, what are you doing to the trees and the root system in that, and are you eventually going to kill them? There's no sense in building a nice trail in a forest if you kill off the forest. And so you can see just where ATVs have come through here, how much you can see the network of roots that have been exposed. I'm just meandering. What I'm going to do is meander down to here. As you can see, I'm just sort of picking out certain points for the tape and then get everyone's input of, well, how would we like to make a trail? Points that you may want to go to. And even though the trees and everything from the recent heavy rains may be jammed up into one place, is this a place that you would want a bench or a table or something such as that, that people can have different ways that they can get to here, but it's an area that they can enjoy. And even though I wouldn't look at it as the initial, people are going to go down naturally to the trail. So that becomes important. And instead of just going down over the hill, it's going to erode and erode more and more. How can you build something that people can use and will use? They're going to want to go as much in a straight distance as much as possible, but then eventually how can you make it so that it's sustainable and people will use it? So I'll put a ribbon here as one of the other points, and then I think as I'm going back, I'm just going to sort of meander on top of this ridge and then go back out onto the gas line. Anyone have any thoughts on anything so far on?
If you were gonna do something, if you wanted to go down to the creek here, Ron, wouldn't you be looking at widening it out and do a switchback instead of straight down? Because you could control the erosion more on a switchback than what you could a straight down.
Right. And even utilize, you want to go over towards the road a little bit more and then come back and utilize even the flatter so that you're tackling a littler places of the steep hillside as possible. And at first you may even look at steps, and steps are a barrier for people, but then can you get away from steps once
Steps
people...
are tough to maintain.
Yes, they
They're
are.
tough to maintain.
Yeah. Anything on a hillside like this is going to be very tough to maintain. That what rocks you have in here have a tendency to be rounded and they never knit together. So there's more of the rolling function to a lot of them, and that's
Steps, I think you have to be aware of because of the area that you have to be aware of the frost factor for the steps, because they'll push them steps one way or another. And most of the time they'll start pushing it out.
And you have that even with the with going back and forth with big elbow turns and everything, that to even stabilize it. How do you stabilize that slope so it doesn't keep working away? So working away.
Can you put rails in, put side rails in?
Well, everything becomes a cost on...
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's what lots of people will do, actually put in steel and anchor it, and then add cheaper material to be able to fill and maintain it. But they're trying to do things once so that it's stable and you can move forward with it and not have a high maintenance
If you put switchbacks in, does that give you a higher degree of accessibility for user availability?
Well, it depends, as long as you make it less than 5%. The biggest problem I have with switchbacks all the time is right when you are on a turn. They make them too tight that you lose all your energy either going down or coming out. So I don't like to use switchbacks that much, but one of the things that I'm trying to encourage is whenever you're making a switchback, let me see how I pick up 2 sticks here. Instead of a switchback coming like that, I try to encourage that they come like that. So you have a place here that's actually wider and flatter, that it can be a rest place also, and then you can turn and go back down. And even trying to make that a bigger radius. In Emlenton, we're working on a project, and that's what we're trying to do.
Are the switchbacks more subject to frost versus the steps versus the frost in this area, you would think? Hamilton, they would get probably very similar weather.
And everything depends on sort of the geology of what you have here. How close are you to the bedrock and everything? Here you don't have a whole lot of bedrock. It's mostly the glacial material. As you go south, lots of times you are, especially on a steep hillside, the bedrock and the sandstone may be closer, but that's where you depend on engineers on what's going to be stable and what can work. Now I can tell you that switchbacks for bicyclists work a lot better than steps for bicyclists. It's
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think you have to identify your user
Yeah,
and what
right.
you're gonna use. And I guess that was one of the questions I asked when we were in the room there. What type of users do you want to make it accessible for? That has a lot to do with.
And I think what Marcus had told us one time to even get the people that work here, they want somewhere to go out and be able to do, and to be able to start with that and be able to get exercise, and then you can always branch out more from that. And if you look down there, you can see exactly how hard that water was. Look how you can see
Oh, absolutely.
where the currents were and where the water was actually
Well, a lot of
flowing.
that's from that debris field. That
Yeah.
debris field that just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, and I very seldom use steps because I'm always trying to encourage bicycles. As I'm getting older,
absolutely.
steps become harder and
Absolutely.
harder for
Yeah,
me
absolutely.
also. But I'm also a believer in you pick the easy berries first. So that's
Right.
what we're looking at is what can we do here? This will be another phase to go down to there. But what can we establish here first? And while we're working on this, do we actually come up with an idea and a solution that better utilizes that? As we have the view from over there, the view from here you don't notice the debris field that one as much. You may see a little bit more where the beech tree fell over than what peckers have been working at. But to me, this is another location where you may want a bench and a table, and you can even position it so that one doesn't necessarily see the other, so people can have a little bit of privacy of their own with nature. So all we did was come across a ridge, and maybe we go up and down and around. And the next thing is, well, how do we tie this back up? Do we go back up through here or up over the hill more, or what do we do? And that's one of the reasons why we're all here is to figure out, well, what do you think people would want to have a trail, and how can we identify it, or at least to get started? So what are the thoughts of, once you get to this point, is this somewhat a doable trail to this point with what we've traveled? So if you get there, now I know it's a windy day, but I've never been here that there hasn't been a little bit of a breeze here. And this is probably the fourth or maybe fifth time that I've been here. But I think with a cool stream, you have a place where it's getting sunlight, so you have natural heating where it rises. So there's a pull for the wind to actually blow, and it's open enough that the wind comes through here too. So. Yeah. So I guess a structure could be built here and cleared out a little bit, so it goes around there, and you can either have a rock dam that you can walk across or stay on the one side of it. So, but if someone walks back up to this point, then they can go. If they need to get back in a hurry, they can go that way, or they can circle up around the way we came in. And even though that other where we came in isn't that far, again, they're looking for something to be able to walk and enjoy rather than just circling around a brick building. Marking it a little bit more, and people can sort of fine tune it more on their own then. Does that make sense?
To the right, it just looks like that might be soggy. I mean, that area and then You live further down past that branch is laying in this.
Yeah, and I
So-called
think
road.
let's go down something that can be
Directed to that other place.
you can tie it into there and clean that out a little bit more, and you may want to bring a little bit more material here and just raise it up because the water may have come across here and just washed it out a little bit more. Or another option is to come over in this shoulder a little bit, which may be just high enough that you can have a bigger pool there. But if you're walking from me to Jordan and get the monoflora rose out of here, you may be up out of the mud most of the time.
This is invasive anyway.
Yes.
You don't care if it comes up.
Okay.
With a right-of-way, you may have to check to see what can you put out here
Yeah.
and where it can be put. But even if it's sort of on the corner and some of the trees are pruned back a little bit, that I agree with you. You may see turkey, deer, they walking through or stopping in woods on a snowy evening. You know, we need to make the time that people can just sort of sit and breathe and be able to do things. And as we, I can remember in high school going through this poem, and that was the overall sort of theme of my co-students, that everyone liked the poem because you just stopped for a little bit, breathe, but then you got up and went on with life. Now, the teacher that I had, he had us go through row by row. Everyone had to say what they got out of it. And if someone already picked something about the poem, you had to come up with something else. So my last name being Steffi, and he had us in alphabetical order, Kathy Ziola was the only one behind me. So when it came to me, there was already 30 ideas that had been presented. So whenever he asked me what I got out of it, I went to the stanza about my little horse must think it's queer to stop without a farmhouse near. I told you I'd forget if I wasn't here. But then the next stanza starts, he gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. And I think that's what we do a lot, that, you know, if you look at it, it never really says he's in a sleigh. But everyone assumes that the guy in the poem is on a sleigh and he's being taken around and he just stops and see the woods. And my point to the teacher was, he's sitting there, most of the time he's looking at a horse's ass. But sometimes you just got to get up out of that sleigh and look around and really enjoy it and not have a high percentage of what you're looking at just being a horse's ass. Well, he sent me down to the vice principal's office. He didn't send me right away. It was about the end of the class, and lunch was afterwards. And he called me when I was going out, and he says, "You need to go down and see the principal and tell him what you said here." And I didn't do it. I went to lunch. Well, the vice principal came and got me. So he invited me into his office to have lunch. So we had lunch here, and I explained to him why I said that. And this has always stuck with me. That he says, "Ron, you have a decision to make. You're the horse. Either you can be the leader, and I've seen you lead and do things." He said, "You're a good athlete. You're not the best athlete we have here, and you're smart, and you're no way the smartest one. But you deal with two different groups. You're dealing with athletes, and you're dealing with people that you're sort of a conduit between them." And he said, "You can be a horse's ass and go along with their jokes and everything else, or you can be a leader, and it's up to you." And he said, "That's all I have to say." So I didn't get in trouble that much, but that has stuck with me, and that's part of the poem that I haven't even told my wife about that part of the poem, but it's part of what I like about that poem, and I think it's true, that we have to get out from our normal life and just enjoy what's around there and not allow ourselves just to be taken from place to place. Really think of what we want to do and how we can be leaders and how we can bring others so that they can enjoy what we see and what we enjoy. So, narrow parts. Way to go. You could actually go down and by where those maple trees come and go around the detention pond or retention pond, whatever you want to call it. But one of the things I do want to point out is you can't see it too well from here, but there's drainage ditches that come around there that's diverting the water so it's not going towards the building. And you can sort of see the ridges, but they have some rock dams in there, and the water gets diverted over that way. And then you have a lot of the water from the parking area and the building itself coming here. And right in front of where that's my red truck over there, and right behind it is a place. You want to describe it, Marty, of what was built with the geocells and stone?
Yeah,
There's Marcus. He can explain.
it's for a big parking area where the big ladder truck, fire trucks are able to pull in there without sinking into the ground. Underneath that grass right there in front of that.
And it's very porous. That's one of the reasons for the culverts is probably the water from the building and from that area to come into here. And you can see with the hard storm, instead of the water going right down to the creeks and eventually the Allegheny River and flooding me out in Katanning, why it's built so that it meanders around and you have a place here to actually store the water before it drains, so you don't get a big slug of it all at one time. And I really like it because it's vegetated here, so it's actually using some of the water and transpiring it back into the air and the atmosphere, along with retaining it and cleaning it.
Under the trail.
Yeah.
We're going to use some of the rocks and the concrete that somebody had pushed up onto the trail, and we're going to use that material to create these headwaters for the sluices so they don't erode the bank. So that's an example of what we'll be doing on those two sluices, the entrance and exit.
I see now that at the sand and gravel places, they sell this kind of rock already in the wire basket, so you can use.
mostly pine and it has some beech and hemlocks in it. But try to make a nice little short trail that people can walk around. There are a lot of roots and tripping hazards and things like that. But trying to make something that you'll be able to utilize and have some benches and be able to go and just relax for a while in a more natural setting. So I'll be quiet now and pass one to Marty, and you can add more.
Okay. Well, what we did today is a part of a workshop series that We Conserve provided funding for, and we were able to get the matching grant monies from Parkside of Corry, of WeCom, as well as Impact Corry, and that allowed us to be able to purchase the services of Ron Steffi, who is a trail, what's your title?
Consultant.
A trail consultant.
Which means I've just made plenty of mistakes, and I know the mistakes, so I try to tell other people so they don't make the mistakes.
So this is the fourth of, or the last of 4 sessions that we've had on different trails in the community. And we're really excited about being able to come up to Parkside because we really think that these nature trails that we're talking about in terms of developing it on the Parkside property actually will be able to network with trail systems that Impact Corry is working on as a part of their strategic plan. And ultimately, what we would be connecting to is the Corry Junction Greenway Trail, which is a main corridor of the Erie to Pittsburgh trail lines. And that is another corridor within the industrial heartland. So that's a 1,600-mile trail system. So this maybe little quarter mile of trails that we're talking about developing in probably the next year can eventually connect you to 1,600 other miles across 3 states, and I forget 13 counties, I believe. So it's a really ambitious task that local trail groups have been working towards, but people like Ron being able to have that experience in helping us develop those trails for people in the community, and then also being able to connect us to cities as well as other areas. So it's a really exciting opportunity that we're working towards, and we're glad that Parkside was able to provide us with that matching funding that allowed us to get the grant money from WeConservePA. And also for the free lunch. So